July webinar. My name is Katarina Yerid. I'm a petrophysicist with SM Energy in Denver, and I'm a part of this wonderful committee, the SPE Gulf Coast Section DNI Programs Committee. And it's an honor for me to welcome you today to our webinar entitled Microaggressions, the What, the How, and the Pitfalls. Our speakers today are Tajuana Antwine with Mindshift LLC and Beverly Jurenko with Inside Edge Consulting LLC. So just a quick overview of the agenda of today's webinar. We will have a diversity moment presented by Jesus Capo. And our, let me please remind everybody to mute themselves too. Then next we'll have our programs committee called Volunteer Highlights and Announcements. And then we'll dive right into the presentation of today's talk. And then we'll have a Q&A and a wrap up of the with a virtual group. So make sure you look pretty. We'll take a screenshot. All right, I'll hand it over to Jesus.
Thank you, Katarina. As you mentioned, my name is Jesus Capo, and I just want to share this diversity moment, and the topic is going to be inclusion. I'm going to start with my personal drive to enter the SPE DNI program team, just as Katarina said. And it was to explore and understand the how and the ways that diversity and inclusion can improve the performance at work. We all know and learn that the oil and gas industry is very diverse in background, gender, values, languages, even nationalities. And we also learn that the value added that comes from creating and maturing propositions with different perspectives. However, in my mind, the inclusion component was a little less evident. So that's why I started researching a little bit about the subject, and I found out what you see in the first bullet. That the value of diversity can be lost if we are not using the tools or skills of inclusivity to bring it out. Second is that when we make every person welcome and safe, we can achieve a level of trust and cooperation that will enable high-performance organizations. Just to give you an example of what I'm thinking or talking about, or what I was looking is, you can see Simon Sinek, and he shows like the Navy SEALs as an example of high-performance organization. So then I started thinking, what is the objective? The objective of inclusion then is to generate the environment where individuals with those specialized expertise and complementary skills, like all of us in the oil and gas, focus to achieve clear and outstanding results, collaborating and innovating to produce the work at the highest level. That's what we call insiders. If we don't have insiders, you will see the rest of the third bullets. We could potentially jeopardize and have outsiders. Go to the next slide, if you don't mind, Katarina. As such, the idea is for me to share at least the top 5 skills or tools, as I mentioned at the beginning, of how we can become an inclusive leader. As you will see, or you will see in the future, it's like they complement the usual leadership skills that you have been familiar or heard before, like driven, strategic, etc. And the first one at the top, you will see the cornerstone of it. It's what's called the self-awareness. Why self-awareness? Because success is an inside job, and it begins with every single one of us. We have to know who we are, what value we bring, what are our strengths, and also what are our weaknesses. But also makes you aware when you know that there are the others' contribution, and you have to be comfortable with that by them and not be threatened. And that rolls into the second one, humility. Humility is important because it keeps you grounded, because we can recognize and acknowledge that we have weaknesses, and humble leaders are willing to hear constructive criticisms and open our own need to grow. That's an important thing. And that in return will help you stay in the game longer be more proactive and productive, performing in a longer time. You also have to be curious, which is the third one. Curiosity allows you to ask the questions, the right questions, and also allows you to learn from your team. So, and this basically, it's the major stimulant for creativity and creative thinking. And you heard, like lately in the past year, our job requires to be creative for certain and diverse reasons. And nothing better than a well-worded question that triggers this idea, new ideas and insights. Then it goes to the courage. Why courage? Because being inclusive leaders basically requires that you believe in adding value. And sometimes to achieve that, you have to ask the right question, but get out of your comfort zone. And that it requires a lot of strength in you, courage. And that rolls into the final of the 5 that I chose, which is listening. And I'm going to start with something that I heard from Larry King that says, I never learned anything while I was talking. So listening is not a personal choice. Say, I'm a good listener. No, it's something that you earn by the person that you are listening to. And why are we listening? Basically, what you try to achieve is learn from your teammates, in this case, from their experience, their stories, and even the biases sometimes. Listening is trying to get the meaning of the words that are said to you with appreciation that sometimes people may say the wrong things. They say what they are trying to say badly, sometimes emotionally. So don't get flustered and don't take it personally. You have to show the curiosity and really understand the meaning of it. And that's what I got, for you to share. I really like and find this very rewarding. And I took it from this podcast that you see in the screen. It's from John Maxwell. And if you receive the presentation, there's a link to it. There are more than 5. I would like you to get the effort and explore a little more. So I'm going to hand it over now to Catalina. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you, Jesus, and thank you for sharing this diversity moment with us. Thank you all of you for joining us here today and taking some time in your busy calendar to learn some more from diversity. We just wanted to highlight who is making all this possible. We have an amazing group of people passionate about diversity, and we just want you to know who's behind this and it's making it possible. You've already heard from Katerina and Jesus, but we have some other amazing team members that are here for you to get familiar. We have Manisha, Sarah, Willie, Trina, which you will hear from her in just a second. And then we have our lead, Dozy. And we also want to give a shout today to Deborah Martujic. She's from the communications team, but she's being our host today to make it all possible. So thank you all for the team. Keep joining us in our events. And we're really happy that you're here. Now, we want you to continue hearing from us. And the best way to be updated, I'm just going to share. And Katerina, if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the best way for you to stay connected with us. Of course, you can reach out to any of us, individually, but, SPE Gulf Coast section has put this nice tool where you just log into your account, easy. Just go to spe.org and spegcs.org. You can update your email preference and you can select the teams that you want to, or the groups that you want to hear from. So not just from the DNI. I mean, we would obviously love for you to click and select us, but as you can see, you go in content, you click on update email preferences, and you'll have a full list of all of the ones that you can hear from. You can just click on them, and that's the best way for you to get our email blast and just know that you're going to be hearing from us. We are really happy that you're here joining us, and with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Trina, and she's going to get us started and welcome our host today. Thank you.
Thank you, Catalina. As she said, my name is Trina Engels, and today I have the pleasure of introducing our amazing speakers. Both of these women are leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also they're both home-based here in Houston, so they're a great resource for our community. Tajuana Antwine is the owner of Mindshift LLC. It's a company that offers diversity, equity, and inclusion training and consulting. She's a certified project manager and change management professional who began her career managing work, leading organization transformations in diversity, equity, and transition. Tajuana is a mechanical engineer and has spent most of her career in oil and gas. Beverly Jurenko is the founder of Inside Edge Consulting LLC. She provides DEI consulting services, executive coaching for leaders learning to embrace inclusion, and empowering coaching for early career diverse talent. She's worked in Latin America, Russia, Europe, and for a Japanese company in a variety of industries, including oil and gas, private equity, and finance. She was formerly the director of diversity and inclusion for Antwine Petroleum, which is where I met her. And she holds a BA in economics from Yale and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Please welcome our speakers, and we'd like to get started so they have plenty of time to go through their presentation.
Super. Thank you very much for the introduction, Trina. I'm just going to share my screen now. So, hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Here is a bright red slide to get your attention because we think that this topic is so important. Do I have your attention? If I do, you can type yes into the chat. If I don't, I'll have to think of a bolder color than red. But I hope I do have your attention. So we're going back to work as we're transitioning from COVID, even with the ups and downs. And many people are excited to get back to work, but not everybody. The New York Times reported on June 23rd that only 3% of Black women want to return to the office, partly because of microaggressions. One was quoted as saying, "I actually like not having to go into the office and be constantly reminded that I'm the only Black woman there." That's a big deal. Obviously, there's something going on there, and we're going to tell you more about it. Here's our agenda, and I want to say that I'm really excited that the Gulf Coast section of the SPE has formed a DEI council. When Trina Engels, my former colleague at Anadarko, invited me to speak, I was thrilled. I invited Tajuana Antwine to join me because no one person can tackle microaggressions alone. Each of us has our own set of experiences, our own superpowers, and our own challenges. And the best way to learn is by listening to each other. So now here's some background on us. Tajuana.
So thanks everyone for having me, and thanks to Beverly for inviting me to come along to speak. I'm really excited to have this opportunity today. Trina told you a little bit about myself, so I won't repeat that. I do want to tell you a couple of things about my company, Mindshift. I actually created a set of courses called the My Story Allyship courses. Mindshift is about transforming lives through storytelling. So I really help individuals and organizations to shape their own stories related to diversity. And that can look like strategy development or helping organizations to develop a more inclusive culture. And of course, the training courses that I offer, and not just the courses that I've developed, but I have also developed individualized courses for organizations.
Tajuana is a full partner in this with me, and I can recommend her courses very highly. For me, DEI is my passion. I support people to build a world filled with inclusion so everyone can shine. I help leaders unmask their assumptions around diversity so they can truly embrace belonging. And I help early career talent pursue their goals tenaciously without compromising standards of integrity. So this slide is here to let you know that everyone belongs here. You may be an expert in microaggressions, you may be a skeptic. You are most likely to be somewhere in between, but everyone belongs here and we want you to know it. We are assuming that everybody is coming here with their ears and hearts open and willing to learn. that we're going to listen to one another and assume best intentions. Trina told me that maybe not everybody is so familiar with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'll just very quickly review a couple of definitions so that we're all on the same page. So diversity is a mixture of people with differences that are both visible and invisible. There are many dimensions of diversity. The first being what we see, the farthest one being what's deep inside of us and who we are as people. So you can think of it as diversity is inviting everybody to the dance. Equity is when everybody is given the same opportunities to participate, kind of like everybody has an opportunity to add songs to the playlist at the party. And inclusion is where everyone truly feels that they belong, so they can be their true selves without hiding things about themselves. So you can dance and have fun and not worry about it. So now I'd like you to take out your phones. It may have been put in the chat beforehand, but pull out your phone, go to your text messaging, and punch in for the recipient 22333 and put in inside edge 128. You'll get a prompt, but ignore going to poll everywhere because it makes you log in and you have to create an account and that'll take more time. So you can just, after you tag inside edge 128, you can type in what comes to mind when you hear the word microaggression, and you can put in more than one word. So just go at it. We'll give it 1 minute to populate. Wow, some interesting things coming in here. Unwanted, subtle, misunderstood, attack, aggression, define, broadly, unwanted, discrimination, misunderstood, unexpected, subtle. Oh, subtle is so important. You're going to hear a lot of that. Thank you. This is truly interesting. I hope you can see the variety of responses that we get. And I'm going to lock this and move on to our next slide right now. So back to you, Tajuana.
So let's just examine the word microaggression, because that can be part of the confusion around understanding what a microaggression is. Because to the receiver of a microaggression, it may not seem so small. And we put here a picture of different size rocks or pebbles, because I think of microaggressions in that way. If you think of one person who may go through the day or the week or the month and receive several microaggressions, the first one may not have as big of an effect as the 100th one or the 30th one. After you keep piling on the small microaggressions, they start to feel pretty heavy. And then secondly, when you think about the word aggression, the person who actually is doing or giving the microaggression may not have an intention to be aggressive. So maybe the word microaggression isn't the best way to think about it. Maybe Beverly can talk about another way we can think about microaggressions.
Yeah, so we think the term microaggression isn't a good one. Maybe you agree too. It is the standard term that people use, but we think there's a better one, and that is subtle act of exclusion, or SAE. And for the rest of our presentation today, we're going to refer to what we're talking about as SAE, or subtle acts of exclusion, rather than microaggression. And that's because, you know, micro sounds like, well, it's such a little thing, it doesn't really matter. And when you hear the word aggression, as Tajuana mentioned, you know, the intent wasn't always to be aggressive. And the first response is normally, that's not what I wanted to do. I wasn't intending to be aggressive. So I recommend this book. You can listen to it. You can find it on audiobooks or Audible. I can't remember, but it's out there in recorded version, or you can buy it. It's really practical, easy to follow. It's not full of jargon. It's written by Tiffany, Jana, and Michael Barron. And it really does describe what's going on here, that these acts are subtle. It's not always clear that the intent was to harm or that there was any intention to harm at all. But the outcome is that people feel excluded. So if you think of it that way, it's not so hard to understand the impact, and it's much easier to relate to. We've all felt excluded at some time in our lives. It's just a fact. That happens to all of us. So from now on, we invite you also to use the term SAE instead of microaggression.
So we thought it was an important discussion to have, and this intent versus impact is not only important when you think about something like SAEs, it's also an important concept in just diversity and inclusion in general. So when we talk about intent, we talk about the intent of the doer, so the person that actually is committing the SAE. What did that person mean by their actions or by their words? So some examples could be maybe that person was trying to tell a joke, maybe they were even trying to pay a compliment or flirt. But on the other hand, what was the impact to the receiver of those words or actions? What effect did it have on that person? And the effect isn't always negative. So there could be positive effects of whatever those words or actions were. It could be negative or it could be neutral. So there could be no effect. So say I said, oh, hey, I went to a meeting today about this project, and you're not on that project. It doesn't really impact you one way or the other. The important thing to remember, though, is that you can cause harm even if you don't intend to. So when we talk about something like SAEs, we really are talking about what is the impact to the receiver.
And we thought a lot about how to title the different roles in this. And we chose doer as the person who's committing the SAE because it is a person who's doing something, but sometimes we hear the term offender. If the intention wasn't to be offensive and it was accidental or unintentional, that's going to stop people from listening. And we really want you to stay with us and keep listening. And so that's why we chose the term doer. And for receiver, you can also hear the term target. People are targeted for SAEs and targeted disproportionately. But we chose the term receiver because sometimes the target doesn't actually register the SAE, but when the message is received, it's pretty clear what we're talking about. So here is a person, and this person is ready to fight. And this is the typical response that occurs when someone is confronted. Sorry, Cassandra, could you please turn off your microphone? This is the first response that we see when somebody is confronted after having committed an SAE. First thing they're going to do is get defensive. They're going to talk about how they're not this or not that, or they're not aggressive, and how could you say that? And the second thing that's going to happen is that they're going to go on the attack and want to say that the receiver is being too sensitive or being a victim or trying to get attention or making things up. And so we think this is not a healthy way to learn about something that happens. And so we're going to show you a better way to respond.
So we talked a little bit about how we chose the terms. We just want to be clear about the different roles that you can play in SAEs. So we talked about the doer as the person that's actually committing the SAE and the receiver as the person against whom the SAE is committed. But another role to consider in this interaction is the bystander. So that would be the person who observes the interaction. Either they are in the group where they're talking, or they may be somewhere close enough by to be able to observe or to hear what has been said or done.
So now we have another poll, and I see some people have been eager beavers and working ahead. But if you haven't, please, and I cleared this once already. If you haven't, please pull out your phone, go back to your 22333, and you should be already linked with Inside Edge 128, and just type in your answer to this. I would like to recognize the courageous souls who admitted that they have been the offender. Really, I should have said doer in the slide to be consistent. So you can think of it as doer. And it looks like most of us recognize that we've been in all three positions at one time or another. So thank you for this, for your participation in that. Now we're going to talk about some examples.
One comment, Beverly, that was made on the last slide is that there could possibly be another category, which is unknown.
Thank you. Good idea. Well, I'll add that for the next time.
So we just thought maybe we could give a few examples of what a microaggression might look like. And we have selected ones that we actually have experienced. The first one that I thought would be a good one to talk about here was being expected to yield. So I'll just describe a little bit what that looks like. It actually happens to me a lot. It looks like when I'm actually physically walking somewhere and I encounter another person where we'll have to cross paths. And I'll say white person because that's typically when I see it happen. So I'm crossing paths with another white person and the expectation is that I will stop so that person can pass. Another way that it looks is in public places. So like maybe on a sidewalk or even at a public event where there may be a bunch of white folks gathered and they're kind of in the way, in the path, the walking path, and the expectation is that I will go around or that I will find my way. And when the opposite is true, then the expectation is that I will move to clear a path. You can move to the next slide. Because I really like to talk about why does this matter? It assumes really that certain people have a right to space based on something that doesn't really have anything to do with that. And I'll also say that I've seen this happen with not just physical space, but also emotional and verbal space. So with women specifically in places like meetings or places where there may be a bunch of interaction, verbal space expected to yield can look like who is the person who's always interrupted or talked over or expected to not say as much as other folks in the room. And then emotional space is more around the range of emotions that a person is allowed to have in the workplace based on race or gender. So for example, if I'm really excited and I get loud or animated about it, I can be seen as aggressive or frightening or loud. And when a male colleague does the same thing, then he's seen as passionate. So those are just a few examples. Another thing is it can make the receiver feel like that they're not valued the same as other members of the team, or even as though they're invisible.
Very important to feel valued. So here's the next example. Where are you really from? So with a name like Jurenko, I get questions about where I'm from time to time. And I've also worked overseas, so I've gotten that question a lot. And it's not so much asking where you're from, because we are naturally curious as human beings. We're taught to show curiosity in other people. We may be wanting to just learn about another person and be showing interest in them because we want to build a relationship with them. So it's not so much asking people, where are you from? It's after they answer you the first time, when the second question emerges, said with emphasis on the word really, where are you really from? And that makes people feel uncomfortable. It reinforces the idea that only some people are truly American and the rest of us don't belong. It has the effect of making people feel like they're an outsider and they're out of the loop. This matters because when somebody feels alienated, it causes stress about how they look, how you are, what clothes you wear, the food you eat, lots of things that are about you as a person and not about your work. And we do know that at work, it should be about the work, not about something very personal. So it makes you feel like you're not only an alien, but also an alien under a microscope. And how are you supposed to relax and do your job in a challenging environment when you feel like people are analyzing every little thing you do all the time? That is not productive. So another reason it matters is it jeopardizes trust in the relationship. Because when you ask somebody a question and they answer, and then you ask them again in another way with emphasis on, well, what's the real answer? You're telling them you don't trust them, and you're telling them you don't believe what they say. Similarly, they're not going to trust you because they're going to wonder, why don't they believe what they say? Why do they keep asking me this question? So we don't want to question the integrity of our coworkers, especially when it's a question as simple as, hey, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Just take the answer at face value and move on.
So the last one we'll talk about here is around assuming that people are the help, or are you the help? And that can look several ways as well. One of the ways that I've encountered it being a lot of times the only female engineer, the only Black person on my floor, that a person comes onto the floor and assumes I am the janitor, the admin, whatever the helper role is. It also can look like in meetings, being the only female, where I'm expected to go make copies, or I'm expected to be the one that goes to fetch lunch or to clean up after everybody after they leave. It's really about assuming a lower capability and also assuming a job level that's lower than the person actually is. So why does this matter? It really is about making assumptions about a person's capability based on factors that aren't really related to capability. And another way to say that is assuming because I am a Black woman that I am incapable of certain things. It also can make the receiver feel as if they aren't valued again. So they're not a valuable member of the team, or they're not as valuable as other members of the team, or that they are invisible. And so we kind of put together a summary on the next slide of for all of the various microaggressions, what they can, SAEs, can make the receiver feel like. For one, it can make them feel like that they're not really American, as we discussed, strange or weird, as if they're a less capable member of the team. And unfortunately, as you continue to assume people are less capable, sometimes that can mean they can perform down to your expectations. So we really want to have members of our team performing to the level of capability that they can. It can make people feel as if you think they are dangerous, and sometimes even exotic if there are some fetishizing based on race or gender. Also making people feel like they're making too big of a deal, right? So certain things, as I mentioned with microaggressions, they can pile up. At some point, it starts to be experienced as trauma, even if you're the last or one of just so many of the microaggressions SAEs. And it makes the person seem like, well, am I crazy? are you really making this up? Also that they should be avoided, so they're not included in those events where other members of the team. Finally, easy to imitate or mock, and no one likes to be made fun of.
And you can see how the stress adds up on the face of the picture, the fellow in the picture we have here. One little incident may not bother you, but when you're getting 3 a day, how are you supposed to relax and focus on your work?
And so then when we think about, as the receiver of an SAE, how should you react? And in the next few slides, we'll talk about each person in this interaction, how they should react, but we'll start with the receiver. We chose a picture of a tightrope here because SAEs can really create a tension between your own standard of integrity as the receiver. And so in terms of what you're willing to put up with or being willing to say if something impacts you versus the need to get along. Everybody really wants to be seen as a member of the team and nobody wants to be that guy, right? So the first thing that you should do as the receiver of the SAE is get in touch with yourself. So your own psychological safety is important, more important than anything else. So some of the questions you may ask yourself may have to do with your own mood at that time, your own psychological state. If you're just not in the point at that moment to really address it, the best thing may be to just decide that you're not going to speak up. It also could have to do with the interactions that you've had with that person before. So you have to evaluate all of that and then decide how you're going to respond. And sometimes the response is to do nothing. Sometimes the response looks like changing your behavior. So that could be you just avoid that person, or you make sure that when you are in the room with that person, you have another person with you. And then finally, speaking up, which could be speaking up in the moment, or it could also be speaking up later, whether it's to that person or to another person that you trust that may be able to help you sort through your the impact to you. So if you do decide to speak up, it's important to convey to the doer that the SAE that they committed and that you felt uncomfortable or weren't pleased with their actions or words. And then finally to explain so that they can understand the impact of their words and their actions.
So if you do speak up, I thought I would just add a couple of examples of things that you could say. You could say, that's not funny. You could say, help me understand your thinking. You could say, hold on, I need to process what you said. What do you mean? Or, you know, that's not really okay with me. And then finally, I'm not really a fan of this one, but I'm sorry, what? And I don't like that one because what are you apologizing for? You shouldn't be apologizing for what somebody else said. But anyway, those are a couple of ideas. And if you're the bystander, don't underestimate your role. Your role is so important. You are the witness to all of this. And remember, the bystander is always in the majority because there's only one doer and normally there's one receiver because you wouldn't create an SAE to the majority because that would create a backlash from the crowd. So the bystander is typically in the majority, and that means you have the power to create cultural change. So as Tajuana mentioned, the first thing to do is check on the receiver. How is the receiver doing? Sometimes an SAE will have no impact on the receiver because it's just not an issue that they relate to. Maybe it targets what's going on with you more than it does with them. So check to see if the receiver is offended. And they might not be. Also consider the context. You're going to want to meter your response, whether you're in a big group or a small group or at the coffee machine or in a meeting. So definitely try to tailor what your actions are going to be to that. And remember, you may react to something, but the receiver may not want to address an SAE in the moment, because we as the bystander don't know everything else that's going on with them, what other conversations are occurring, or what are the other factors in the relationship the receiver has with the doer and other things going on. So as the bystander in a group, we could actually do more harm than good in many cases if in the moment we raised the issue of the SAE when the receiver was not reacting and didn't say anything to it. But there are things that we can do. The first thing is, afterwards, you can approach the receiver and let them know that you noticed that the SAE happened, and ask them, what was your experience? This is how I interpreted it. What was your experience? And get their input on how they're reacting to it. Maybe they'll be okay, maybe they'll be very upset, but without a doubt, they are highly likely to appreciate that you were listening and that you care enough to ask them, what was your experience? You can also go to the doer and let them know that this happened and that you felt uncomfortable with it in a respectful way, because there's nothing that's going to harm a culture more than humiliating a doer. So here are some things you can say to the doer. I just don't think that saying things like that here is consistent with our corporate values. Or you can say, I'm not comfortable with that. It doesn't seem like that's how we behave around here. Or even, I didn't realize that's how you think. Tell me more about that. Maybe there's some issue to talk about that could be really beneficial for everybody involved to air. Or how about just as simply as, you know, what you said, I don't know if you're aware of it, but it could be taken by somebody as harmful. And because I care about your work and our relationship, I wanted to share that with you. Or simply, I'm not okay with it. So another thing you can do is try an affirmation. There's even a term, microaggression, that is floating around, where if you see somebody who is likely to be a receiver or who you feel has received an SAE, you can try making a positive statement in support of the person. And in general, affirmations only bring back more than you give by expressing them. It can only help create an environment of positivity.
And I love the idea of affirmations just in general for your team. It's a good way to uplift your team. So that's an awesome strategy to practice affirmations, especially in these situations. So we talked about already when we were talking about intent versus impact, that it's possible to cause harm and not intend to. And based on what I discussed with the possible reactions of the receiver, the second concept that it's important to understand is that it is possible for you to cause harm and not know anything about it. So depending on what the receiver has decided to do in terms of response, if they've decided not to respond to you, you could be going around doing this all the time and no one ever knows. So when you find out from a person that you've actually committed an SAE, when the receiver has the courage to tell you this is what happened, then it's very important how you respond, that you treat this as a growth opportunity. The first thing that's important to do is to apologize. And the way that you apologize is also important. When we talk about not centering yourself, if you have just a brief apology, hey, I'm sorry that I did that I made you feel that way. If you start crying, for example, as the doer, so if you're so upset you start crying, then you put the person who actually received the SAE in an uncomfortable position where now they're supposed to comfort you. So make sure that you're in the state of mind to be able to offer the kind of apology that doesn't center you as the person that needs to give an apology. Secondly, when we talked about when we gave the poll, the majority of folks on the call said they've been in all three of these positions. And I have, been a doer myself. So it's not that we can go through life and never ever commit one of these. So you have to be able to just forgive yourself and see this, as I mentioned, as a growth opportunity. And finally, the best way that you demonstrate that you're really sorry about committing an SAE is in the way that you go forward. So in changing your behavior and being willing to be accountable for your actions. This can actually be a way that you build trust and build relationships in your team. If you take this opportunity, then when you know you've done this, to apologize and get it right, you can actually strengthen the relationships in your team.
Very important about how you apologize. And if in the Q&A anybody wants to talk more about that, we'd be happy to. So in summary, we hope this has been beneficial to you. We hope that you have learned how to recognize a microaggression or a subtle act of exclusion, and that you will take the idea of SAE with you. We hope that you will be familiar with some of the types of SAEs or microaggressions and the impact. We hope you understand and can see and recognize in your day-to-day life the different roles that we can play and the importance of your role as a bystander. And we've given you some ideas of responses. By no means is this exhaustive. There's research on this topic. There's a lot more that we could talk about, but we want to leave time for Q&A and be respectful of the schedule of the SPE. So we've been a little brief, but we would be delighted to continue the conversation with you. Tajuana and I are available for talks with employee resource groups, with your teams, with your management, one-on-one for coaching. You can find us on our websites or in social media, and we would love to hear from you with your feedback and comments and suggestions. Please connect with us both. And at this point, we can open it up to questions.
I do want to mention one more thing, Beverly. First, I want to thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. I saw some of the comments here and looking forward to your questions. I did actually, one of my stories, my story courses are based on my actual stories of being a Black person, some of the experiences that I have. One of the experiences that I cover is my experience as the only Black manager in a company. And I talk about some of the microaggressions or SAEs that I experienced there. I created a special coupon code for everyone that participated in the talk today. It's SPE 2021. If you use that at my website, which is on the Thinkific platform, you can get $50 off of the course, which is called The Only. The best way, I'm sorry, one other thing to mention on the course, there are resources related to my story and an opportunity to create your own plan. So how will you ally with underrepresented communities? The best way to follow me on social media is on my Instagram page, which is at Mindshift LLC, but I also have a Facebook page. And you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out to me individually. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in there, Tajuana. I just sped ahead a little bit. So yes, and I want to mention, as you see here, I am offering also a 20% discount if you are affiliated with the SPE. You can go to my website and I offer a free 30-minute discovery session to talk about your challenges and the possibilities you see for yourself. That's free. And then for coaching, I'm offering a 20% discount for SPE affiliates. So yes, thank you. And I think we're ready to open. Are we ready to open it up to questions now, Tajuana?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So let's see. I will stop sharing, and so we can see everybody and start thinking about questions.
Yeah, thanks again. It was such a great presentation, and everyone's comments, they all resonate the same thing. I definitely learned a lot personally. And so thank you for both of your time. One of the questions, and I think I'm a great question, by the way. So how do you respond when you are in a situation with a doer and, you know, where the doer always tries to paint this picture where it's a joke or like they're trying to be funny, but, you know, it's not really funny. It might even make the bystander uncomfortable. What are a few ways that, you know, suggestions that they could respond to or manage that situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of control over other folks' reactions. The best thing that you can do if you notice that the doer is one of those folks that tends to say it's a joke or brush it off, so not being willing to follow the steps that we mentioned in terms of being a good steward and following up on feedback. I would say that depending on that person's role in the project and how, or in your team, and how it is impacting your team, you could consider additional actions that may, you know, go into HR or go into another trusted person on the team. I also still go back to the idea of affirmations. So even if that person is not doing, being a good actor on the team, you definitely don't want them to impact the performance of the other members of your team. So you want to make sure to take advantage of the, you know, the affirmations. You want to make sure that the folks who are on the receiving end of those SAEs understand that they are seen, that you support them, that you recognize their work. And I really think that's the best that you can do. We individually have to be willing to do our own work. And if it's impacting the performance of the team, then we have to be responsible for our actions either individually or if it has to escalate to something else. Beverly, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, Tajuana, I think that was a great response, and I fully agree with everything that you said. But there are a couple of other suggestions, things that I've seen that may work. There is no, you know, you really need to know your own personality and what your strengths and weaknesses are, because something that works for one person may not work for you. Like if you're really funny, you can turn it back into a joke on the other person by flipping it and making fun of something about them, which is kind of an aggressive response, but you know, hey, sometimes we do that in the office. Another thing that I find is very effective for just about anybody is just to say, how's that funny? Like, you know, a suggestive, you know, some kind of SAE that makes people feel uncomfortable, that is inappropriate, is very difficult to explain when you're asked, why is that funny, if it's not. So that just puts the person off guard, you know, and that's embarrassing for them. When you can't answer a question, it's kind of embarrassing. So they'll be less likely to do it again because you've disarmed them by saying, what's funny about that? I don't get it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I can definitely relate to that. So that's awesome. So we're talking about bystanders, right? Because a lot of times you witness and the aggression isn't directed at you, but you're definitely witnessing it. What's your recommendation on when they step in? Like, is there a time limit? What are some rules that, engagement rules, like should they sometimes maybe wait and approach both separately after, depending, because, bystanders also have influence and power depending on who they are. So yeah, and yeah, like if you're an intern and you're a bystander, it's different. If you're a manager and you're a bystander and the aggressor is lower level to you, you have you you can essentially control that situation or take control of that situation if you need to. So
Yeah, that's a great question. And a couple of things really to consider. I always like to go back to relationship. And I think that also sort of answers, again, the first question too, is that the folks that we have relationship with tend to be easier to approach, either from from the bystander perspective, whether you're going to the doer or the receiver. So that's a big consideration, is what your relationship is to that actual person when you think about it. In terms of timing, I don't think it's ever too late to provide feedback. However, it's always more useful the closer to the incident that you can provide feedback. But you do need to carefully consider, as we talked about, what was that person's reaction? If they ran out of the room crying, you probably don't want to run right after them. You probably want to let them, compose themselves, get themselves together before you talk to them. So I think I don't know that there's a firm answer on that. I would say it's never too late. But you definitely want to be considerate of the receiver. Again, if they do nothing, you don't want to bring it up right then. But when you feel comfortable and considering the relationship that you have with both of those folks, you definitely, if you feel empowered to do so, should provide that feedback to both the doer and receiver.
So again, Tajuana answers the question beautifully, but here are a couple of additional thoughts. First of all, if you're at a senior level in the group, let's say you're the CEO, Trina and I know our former CEO. If you are in management, you have the power and you set the example. If you let these things happen and don't check them, you're telling everybody else that it's okay. So you don't have to humiliate people, but if you truly want your organization to be inclusive and you want to harvest the value of diversity in our life experiences, our training, the way we think, the way we solve problems, then you don't want this going on in your company because it's limiting innovation, it's limiting productivity, it's increasing turnover, it's creating job dissatisfaction, which hurts your reputation as a company. So you want everybody working together well. So your responsibility as a leader is more likely to be vocal, immediate, and serious, because it's important that you set the tone. But if you are not in leadership, it is more complicated because there are so many other things going on. So how do you know when it's the right time for you to speak up? And how do you find your voice? That's a hard question. So I'm a student of ontology. That's what my coach training is in. It's the science of being and who you are as a person. And who you are as a person encompasses your personal standards of integrity. And when you call on your standards of integrity, your voice of wisdom answers. So try to listen, look inside yourself about what's going on and what is consistent or inconsistent with your standards of integrity. And that will give you some personal guidance on how to proceed.
I want, and I'm sorry to
Yeah,
circle
that's
back,
great
but I
answer.
think this kind of touches on another question I just saw flash in the chat about whether things are divisive. I 100% agree on leadership setting the tone for the environment and how you provide feedback when you witness these SAEs. But I also just want to add how you as a leader respond when you're told you committed an SAE is another good way that you set the tone for what the culture looks like. And just going back to the initial diversity moment that we had for this meeting, when we talk about courage, right? There's always going to be discomfort, especially when you're working to change a culture. And sometimes that means you have to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations, even if it's going to make folks uncomfortable, if it's going to make them mad. You can explain, you know, what the goal is, what kind of culture that you're trying to set. But as a leader, you definitely have to be willing to have those conversations, and you set the tone for what the culture is going to look like.
Yeah, no, those are great answers. I think the last part was, you know, a lot of times I think when you're talking about microaggression and diversity, etc., and it is divisive, you do have a lot of people that downplay it. You know, they think it's not a big deal, it's over magnified, you're focusing too much on the wrong thing, there's more important things to talk about and discuss, and like, you know, let's park this. How do you effectively communicate that, you know, this is important for performance at work, this is important for profitability? How do you use the, you know, the right terminology? How do you manage those comments?
First, there are actually studies that say it's important, right? So diversity and inclusion actually impacts the bottom line. It impacts your profitability, it impacts your innovation, it impacts your level of competitiveness as a company. So there is a business case for diversity. And I think it's important for companies and leaders to be willing to communicate that. The other thing too, I like to just circle back to is the analogy that we had about it's not a big deal, right? It may not be a big deal to the doer because it's just the one little pebble they're dropping on the stack, right? But what about the person who's the back on which those little pebbles are being dropped? You really have to consider the impact to everyone on the team when you think about the impacts of something like SAEs.
And to build on that, I'm very aware and follow the business case for DEI. In addition to the other drivers, the body of evidence is there, and it continues to grow from the research from companies like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Korn Ferry, Russell Reynolds, various other organizations that focus on productivity and human resources, that it's pretty tough to deny that DEI creates better results. Boards and leaderships that have diversity are more likely to beat the average rate of return and profitability than their competitors by quite a big margin. Teams that have diversity that are functioning well are more likely to be innovative. In oil and gas, there's innovation, there's also cost serving, so they're cost saving. So there are different ways to measure innovation. And finally, man, turnover. You know, we're in a very interesting labor market right now. One day you read there's an incredible shortage, the next day you read that there's more unemployment. It's really hard to get a handle on what's going on because there seems to be a lot of volatility. But one thing is for sure, if you hire people who are diverse and you don't bring them in, mentor them, give them opportunities to grow, treat them fairly so they can develop, and make sure they don't feel excluded socially and culturally, they're more likely to stay. But leaving has a real cost. The cost of replacing somebody at a junior level is on average, I think one of the accounting firms found that it was 6 to 9 months of salary at a junior level to replace somebody. And at a senior level, it's 1 to 2 years of salary and cost to replace somebody. So that says pretty strongly there's a competitive advantage that you can reap through including people so that they will stay and you can develop them. So all else in doubt, go back to the business case because the evidence is there.
No, those are great answers. We've got a couple more questions. So let's say you're a bystander and you're witnessing a situation and you go back and follow up with the receiver and they shrug it off, they pretend it's not a big deal. Would it be a good idea to try and educate them and let them? It's a good question. I actually feel that, I think a lot of people would do that just because you're not that close as a bystander to the receiver and they're not trying to, I think this will be very common if there isn't a relationship between the bystander and a doer, and the receiver.
That's exactly what I was thinking. My answer would be no, unless you have the kind of relationship with that person where they would be open to that kind of teaching or growth. Otherwise, a small affirmation and keep it moving. Or even if you feel like that they didn't give enough feedback to the doer and you're empowered to do so, then that may be an opportunity for you just to go to them and say, hey, this is how it made me feel. Maybe it didn't make the doer feel this way, but it made me feel this way, just so you know.
Okay. Yeah. And then do you feel diverse organizations are more susceptible to microaggressions?
What do you think, Beverly?
Well, it's part of who we are to be imperfect creatures. And it seems to be part of our human nature to create challenges and obstacles for us, no matter where we are. So I don't think that any organization, no matter what it looks like, is going to be 100% perfect. But there's one thing for sure. In our world where demographics are changing and Gen Z and millennials want diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And those generations are our leaders of the future and the ones with the greatest technical abilities right now. You'd be foolish as a manager or as an owner or a board member of a company to ignore the opportunities that diversity, equity, and inclusion can bring you.
I agree with that. And I would just add, I'm not sure that there's any evidence to show that organizations are more susceptible to microaggressions if they're more diverse. But I would say that the more important thing is, what does your culture dictate that you do when they happen? So I'm not sure that it's as damaging that you see them often if your culture says, hey, we're going to provide feedback. We're going to have these tough conversations. We're going to work to make sure that everyone feels like they're included. That is definitely more important and what sets the tone for your organization.
No, absolutely. No, these are great. I think the last question was they wanted to see if you can share more example of SAEs. Might help more bystanders recognize that when they see it. And might be a long one, but maybe the most common ones.
My recommendation actually would be to follow me on social media. So actually on my Instagram account, I, in my stories, will share other accounts that have examples. There are lots of really good accounts that have that. In the next week or so on my Instagram account, I'll be talking a little bit more about some examples that I have. There's just so many. and some may be a little easier to understand than others. I don't know, Beverly, if you have some off the top of your head that you wanted to share, or you have some other good places that people may be able to follow or to read to understand more. I'm sure there are some examples in that book too, in the SAE book.
Yeah, the book has chapters on different types of examples, and you can just Google microaggressions or subtle acts of exclusion and find papers that talk about it. I know you're sending out the slides. There's one paper where they actually created an index of microaggressions in an academic setting and characterized them and gave a lot of examples. So I'd be happy to share that paper if you want to include it in your email to people that includes the slides. But there's a lot out there if you go digging. I don't want to give anybody some ideas on things they can, you know.
Yeah, no, but yeah, anyone have any more questions? I think that was the last of it.
Thank you all so much. It's been a lot of great questions and really good interaction here.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks
you.
again.
I so appreciate this. It's been a true pleasure.
All right, everyone, have a great weekend. Bye.
Did you want to take a picture?
Yes, so well, we're wrapping it up here. We had our Q&A. Thank you so much, everyone, for great questions, great interactions there, comments. We would like to remind you to fill out the survey that will come after this. And a couple of reminders. Again, thank you all for attending. Of course, thank you, Beverly and Tajuana, again, for presenting wonderful material there. And a reminder that our next event is going to be TBD, but we're planning on having a panel discussion with industry champions on D&I. And in November, we'll have an event with Shanta Eden, the COO of Ally Energy. And the title of her talk is going to be Allies Will Power and Empower the Energy Transition. So look out for more details on that. Again, the post-event survey. And like we mentioned earlier, it's easy to join our email distribution list by going to your SPE account, and you can add us there. And we also have a call for sponsors. If people would like to be part of this wonderful momentum here with our SPE GCS D&I group, we have opportunities for sponsorship, and please email Victoria at victoria.pons2020@gmail.com. And now, yes, if you're ready, turn on your webcams, and we will take a nice, lots of smiling faces here. Hold on tight. I think I need to stop sharing so I can get a better view. Yeah, I can get much more, many more people that way. So everybody ready that wants to smile? All right. I'll take another one. Right. Keep it smiling. Diversity, diversity. All right. All right. I got a couple. So
Next time I can sing the diversity song.
that will be great. Again, I think that wraps it up for today. Again, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you all for presenting. And I learned a lot. So that's why I love these webinars. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Awesome job.